In this lecture, we're going to discuss fiscal policy. Now, fiscal policy is the government's spending and taxing policies. So there will be two main components in your fiscal policy. One will be related to spending and the other will be related to taxation. The objectives of fiscal policy are to influence the level of economic activity and aggregate demand, redistributing wealth and income among segments of the population, and allocating resources among economic agents and sectors in the economy. Now, there will be, like I said, two main components in your budget. One will be related to the receipts. So where is the government getting its revenue, its income from, its cash inflows from? So there will be some revenue, then some capital receipts, then some non-tax revenues, bank borrowing, privatization proceeds. Basically, the main component of these receipts include taxation. And the other main component is your expenditure. Now, expenditure can be grant, transfers, interest payments, pension, subsidies, running of civil government, defense and affairs, and there can be many other expenses as well for the government. Now, the government needs to manage these cash flows, these receipts, and these expenditures. So if the government spending is going to exceed the taxes, so if the cash outflow is going to be greater than the cash inflow, then the government will be in deficit. So there will be a budget deficit. And if the government spending is less than taxes, which means that the cash inflows are greater than the cash outflows, then the government will have a budget surplus. Now, why is it important to know whether there is a budget deficit or budget surplus? We'll discuss this later because this will have repercussions for the whole economy. Now, this is taken from the State Bank of Pakistan report, and over here you can see the major fiscal indicators. So the fiscal balance is continuously in negative in Pakistan. The blue line, you can see it is below zero from 2008 till 2019. So that means Pakistan is continuously going into a budget deficit. Now let's see, how does this have an impact on what we are studying? Now, when the government borrows to cover the additional spending, it actually affects the entire market of saving and borrowing. What happens is because the government is borrowing an amount and people are going to purchase that, your money supply is going to shift inwards. I'm trying to make a straight line, but yeah. So your money supply is going to shift inwards because the government has bought the securities from the general sold the securities to the general public, and the general public have bought it. So the money has gone to the government. The money supply has reduced over here, which will cause an increase in the interest rate. Now, because of the increased interest rate, your investment opportunities will get impacted because now the cost of debt has increased. Moreover, and remember, when the interest rate increases, your demand of money actually falls because now you would prefer to save your money rather than to spend it right now. So it will have an impact on the whole GDP as well. Now, moving ahead, this is something that the government is doing deliberately, but sometimes the economy itself has an influence on the budget, and the government themselves are not deciding at that point to increase the revenue or to decrease their expenses. It's just happening automatically. So basically your budget is not that much under control all the time. For example, automatic stabilizers are revenue and expenditure items in the budget that automatically change with the state of the economy in such a way to stabilize the GDP. For example, during recession, tax collection will automatically decrease. The reason being that people will be earning less because they are in recession. Now, if their income is less, then automatically, even if the tax rate is not changed, if the government policy is not being changed, the tax collection, the amount will decrease. Similarly, the government expenditure will increase from the other side, because then the government is going to be spending more on, you could say, unemployment benefits. So their expenditures will be increasing during recession. Now, when the expenditures are increasing and the tax collection is decreasing, this is an expansionary policy that is activated on its own to stabilize the GDP once again. So the government does not even have to deliberately do it, it will happen automatically as well. Then you have automatic destabilizers. So these are revenue and expenditure items in the budget that automatically change with the state of economy in such a way to destabilize the GDP. The difference between both of them is just of stabilization and destabilization. Both are the same thing. Only the destabilizers are actually destabilizing the economy, but that is again something that is happening automatically and the government does not have control over it. Like during expansion, when the business cycle is in the expansion phase, inflation tends to increase. Now, when inflation increases, it has a negative impact on your economy. So prices will tend to increase, which might later on lead to a recession as well and will decrease productivity and so on. But it is something that happens because people have more income and they will spend, and so prices will go up. Now, moving ahead, the last thing that is important in your fiscal policy is that there are two types of deficits. One is structural and one is cyclical. The structural deficit is a deficit that remains at full employment. So it is basically something that is inherent in the economy. So it's in the structure. In order to remove this kind of a deficit, the economy, the country needs reforms that will change the structure of the economy. So they will have to focus more on supply side. Whereas cyclical deficit is a deficit that occurs because of a downturn in the business cycle. So it is just temporary, it will go back, and the government will go into the surplus during the next cycle. So, for example, if there is a you could say there is a plague in the country, then that's a cyclical deficit, because in order to work through that plague, the government might be overspending right now. But once the plague has ended, automatically they will go into surplus.